To the world, Michael Jackson was larger than life. The king of pop? A genius, a mystery. Every move he made was dissected, every word analyzed, every performance immortalized. But behind the dazzling performances, the tabloid frenzy, and the moonwalk that changed music forever, he played a far more personal, powerful role. He was just dad. For Paris Jackson, Michael wasn't a superstar. He was a warm presence, a guiding voice, and a father who did everything in his power to give his children the normal life he himself never had. But when he died suddenly in 2009, everything fell apart. Paris was just 11 years old when she lost the only person who ever made her feel truly safe. And the grief cut so deep, she later admitted she tried to end her own life, just to be with him again. But that's only the beginning of the story. Because in the years since Michael's death, Paris has quietly rebuilt herself, piece by piece. And now she's pulling back the curtain on a life few could ever imagine. A life filled with secrecy, contradiction, and emotional complexity. From private moments at Neverland Ranch to heartbreaking truths hidden behind her father's fame, Paris Jackson is finally telling her story. And what she reveals doesn't just challenge the public's image of her father, it transforms it. This isn't just about a pop legend. It's about a daughter, her pain, and the legacy of love that fame could never erase. On April 3, 1998, in Beverly Hills, California, Paris Michael Catherine Jackson was born into a world she never chose, and one few could ever escape. Her father was already a global phenomenon, her birth destined to make headlines. But to Michael Jackson, she wasn't a story. She was a promise. The name Paris wasn't chosen randomly. Years earlier, Michael, his sister LaToya, and close friend Kathy Hilton made a pact. If any of them had a daughter, she would be named Paris. It was symbolic, a gesture of unity, of love, of shared hope. And when Michael finally became a father, he fulfilled that promise without hesitation. But the circumstances around her family were far from typical. Paris's mother, Debbie Rowe, was a nurse who met Michael while working at his dermatologist's office. Their relationship raised eyebrows. Many speculated it was more of an arrangement than a romance. After their divorce in 2000, Rowe gave up full custody of Paris and her older brother Prince, leaving Michael as the sole guardian. That's when Neverland became their whole world. The sprawling 2,700-acre estate wasn't just a retreat. It was a fantasyland Michael had built to reclaim the childhood he never had. For Paris, it became a cocoon, a place where she could run through meadows, feed animals, and watch movies under the stars, far removed from paparazzi flashes and press rumors. And while the public obsessed over Michael's eccentricities and court battles, inside those gates, he was simply dad. He cooked, he read to them, he homeschooled them, taught them empathy, and instilled a deep curiosity about the world. He wanted them to learn not just about books, but about people, culture, truth. Paris often said that her father was the best dad you could imagine, and he didn't spoil them in the way people assumed. If anything, he tried to make sure they earned things. If Paris read 5 books, she'd earn 5 toys. When they misbehaved, they weren't allowed to use the rides or go to the zoo for the weekend. Even in Neverland, rules mattered. But Michael wasn't strict to be cold. He was teaching them structure, values, and boundaries, things he never had as a child star. And he did it all while protecting them with everything he had, including masks, bodyguards, and extreme privacy. To outsiders, it looked bizarre. But to Paris, it was love. And in that bubble, she was happy, safe, whole. But as we know, safety in Michael Jackson's world was never permanent. Behind the masks, the gates, and the music, Michael Jackson's greatest performance may have been the one no one saw, the role of a father. Michael had experienced the harsh spotlight from the age of 5. He knew what it meant to grow up too fast, to lose childhood before it ever began. And with his children, Paris especially, he vowed to rewrite that script. At home, he wasn't the king of pop. He was a man in pajamas, cooking breakfast, telling jokes, and turning off the TV if it was past bedtime. And Paris soaked in every moment. He was deeply intentional with how he raised her. He taught her about kindness, about spirituality, about standing up for those who have no voice. Michael would show her documentaries, not just Disney movies. He'd speak honestly about history. He didn't sugarcoat it. He explained how the world worked, the good and the ugly. He wanted Paris to understand the truth, not just fairy tales. And while the world labeled him eccentric for covering his children's faces in public, Michael saw it as protection. He was trying to give them something he never had, anonymity. The chance to walk through a park without being mobbed, to go to a store without 1,000 flashes, to be normal, even if only for a few minutes. He didn't believe in spoiling them with wealth, but he spoiled them with time. They'd visit museums, read books together, and do normal things like go to Chuck E. Cheese's or Toys R Us, things that meant everything to a man who never had them as a child. To the public, Michael was myth. To Paris, he was a man who taught her that love meant showing up every single day. But that sense of safety would be ripped away far too soon. On June 25, 2009, the world came to a standstill. Michael Jackson, just 50 years old, was gone. The cause? A cardiac arrest brought on by a dangerous cocktail of medications. The world mourned. Fans cried in the streets. But no grief could compare to what Paris felt in that moment. She was only 11. The man who had been her world, her protector, her everything, was suddenly, violently gone. And for the first time in her life, the fairy tale bubble of Neverland shattered. She was thrust into the blinding spotlight he had worked so hard to shield her from. At his public memorial, Paris stood before millions and broke the silence. Voice shaking, eyes full of tears, she whispered the words that cut through every heart watching. Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. But grief doesn't end with a eulogy. In the years that followed, Paris's life became a quiet descent into pain. She battled depression, she self-harmed, she felt lost in the weight of expectations, of headlines, of shadows she never asked to live under. The media wouldn't leave her alone. Rumors swirled. Paparazzi chased her. She developed PTSD, crippling anxiety, and an overwhelming desire to escape. At one point, she tried. Paris later revealed that she attempted to end her life. She wanted to be with him again. Eventually, she entered a residential therapeutic school in Utah, hoping to find peace. And while the experience helped for a time, she later exposed that the facility used abusive methods, emotional manipulation, fear-based discipline. It left scars that therapy is still helping her to heal. But through it all, she held onto one thing: her father's love. And that love, even in death, would become the compass she used to find her way back. In the years following her father's death, Paris Jackson never stopped looking for pieces of him. Not in photographs, not in documentaries, but in the small, deeply personal moments only she could understand. One of those moments lives in a simple piece of jewelry, a jade-beaded rope bracelet from Africa. Michael wore it the day he died. Paris now wears it as if it were armor. She's spoken about how it still holds his scent. It doesn't just sit on her wrist. It's like an invisible tether to the man who once tucked her in, who made her pancakes, who protected her from a world too hungry to leave her alone. To outsiders, it's a trinket. To Paris, it's everything. But it's not just objects that keep him alive for her. It's the way he shows up in dreams. She's described vivid moments where she can feel his voice guiding her, offering comfort, giving her strength. These aren't casual dreams, these are emotional anchors, proof in her eyes that love doesn't disappear with death. It just changes form. And while the public continues to debate the details of her parentage, was she really his biological daughter? Paris never wavers in her answer. "He was my dad," she said. "He is my dad, the only one that ever mattered." She doesn't entertain the rumors, not because she can't argue them, but because she refuses to give them power. Her bond with Michael wasn't defined by DNA, it was defined by love, commitment, and trust. She's fiercely protective of his legacy, especially against those who try to reduce him to scandal or spectacle. And as she's matured, Paris has begun stepping forward, not to rewrite history, but to clarify it. She's spoken about the man who cooked, who comforted, who cried. Not the man from the tabloids, but the father who raised her with discipline and dreams. And through her quiet defiance, her emotional honesty, and her open heart, she's slowly reframing the world's memory of Michael Jackson. Not as a myth, but as a man. For Paris Jackson, survival was never guaranteed. Inheriting the Jackson name came with a crown she never asked to wear. The moment her father died, the spotlight turned, and it never left her face. Headlines didn't treat her like a child in mourning, they treated her like a curiosity, a celebrity in waiting, a legacy to be dissected. And it broke her. Paris has spoken candidly about the years of emotional collapse that followed. The depression, the panic attacks, the cutting, the suicidal thoughts. At her lowest, she admitted she tried to end her life, just to feel close to her father again. But even that wasn't private, it made headlines. tabloids turned her pain into clickbait. Eventually, her family sent her to a residential treatment center in Utah. She spent years there, finishing high school and rebuilding her sense of self. At first, she thought it saved her. But in 2020, after Paris Hilton's shocking documentary exposed abuses in a similar facility, Paris revealed that she too had been emotionally mistreated during her stay. Isolation, gaslighting, fear-based punishment. Her recovery came not from the program, but in spite of it. Out of that trauma, Paris found a voice not only for herself, but for every other teenager struggling to make sense of mental health in a world that barely speaks its name. And she began defining her identity on her own terms. Paris is openly queer, though she resists narrow labels. "I've dated more women than men," she once said, "but I don't label myself bisexual." She believes attraction goes beyond gender, and her relationships reflect that belief. She's been judged, criticized, sexualized, and shamed. But she's never apologized for who she is. What once made her feel alone now makes her feel powerful. Paris also carries her identity on her skin, literally. Over 80 tattoos tell the story of her survival. Some are tributes to her father. Others mark milestones in her journey. From feathers to dragons, from faith, trust, and pixie dust to his handwritten notes, her body has become a living memoir of both pain and transformation. But perhaps the most remarkable thing is this: Paris doesn't pretend she's healed. She doesn't wear a mask. She shows the cracks, the scars, the nights she still cries. Because for her, survival isn't a destination. It's a decision she makes every single day. And every day she chooses to stay, to speak, and to sing. She reclaims a piece of herself, and a piece of the legacy her father left behind. For most of her life, Paris Jackson was defined by what happened to her. She was the daughter of a legend, the child who cried on stage at a memorial seen around the world, the teenager who spiraled, the tabloid fixture. But something changed when she realized she didn't need to live in survival mode anymore. She could live in service. She could live in truth. Paris began to reclaim the pieces of her story, not by erasing her pain, but by sharing it, publicly, relentlessly, and with a kind of vulnerability most people spend their lives avoiding. She emerged as an advocate, not a celebrity. Someone using her platform to amplify conversations about mental health, trauma, queer identity, and emotional healing. She stopped playing defense. She started telling her story first, before the media could twist it. Paris joined forces with causes close to her father's heart. As an ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, she continued the work Michael began decades earlier, championing compassion, awareness, and equity. Through the Heal Los Angeles Foundation, she also supported at-risk youth and community development programs in underserved areas. For her, it wasn't charity, it was obligation, purpose. Gratitude for a man who taught her that kindness should never be conditional. But the transformation didn't stop there. In 2020, after George Floyd's murder, Paris did something radical. She showed up. No stylist, no security detail, no PR team. Just her, holding a cardboard sign, marching in solidarity with thousands of strangers. She didn't speak to cameras. She didn't chase headlines. She marched because it was right. And in that moment, she wasn't the daughter of a pop icon. She was a human being, heartbroken, determined, and wide awake. Through it all, she also redefined what it meant to be beautiful, successful, and feminine in a world that still tries to fit women into perfect little boxes. With her tattoos, her shaved head phases, her body-positive statements, and unfiltered Instagram posts, she challenged the very culture that once shamed her. Paris wasn't trying to be a role model. She was trying to be free. And for the first time, the world began to see her not just as a survivor, but as an artist, a truth teller, and a force entirely her own. For Paris Jackson, music wasn't a career move, it was oxygen. From her earliest memories, music was part of the fabric of her home. Surround sound stereo systems playing jazz, R&B, classical, Motown, and of course, the Beatles. Michael didn't just expose her to music, he lived inside it, and he taught her to listen, not with her ears, but with her heart. As she grew older, music became Paris's refuge, a place where she didn't have to explain herself, a place where she could bleed safely without judgment. She began writing songs in secret, raw, poetic reflections on love, loss, fear, and recovery. In 2018, she found the courage to share it. She and her then boyfriend, Gabriel Glenn, formed the Soundflowers, a stripped-down acoustic duo that sounded more like folk confessionals than polished pop. Their songs were imperfect, emotionally bare, and full of quiet pain. But they resonated, because they were honest. Then came the moment she'd been quietly building toward her whole life. In 2020, Paris signed a record deal with Republic Records and released her first solo single, Let Down. It was haunting, ethereal, a soundtrack for heartbreak, drenched in reverb and vulnerability. The music video featured Paris falling over and over again into something symbolic and inescapable, and fans took notice. This wasn't a celebrity child dabbling in music. This was an artist making a statement. Her debut album, Wilted, followed in November. It was a sonic diary, atmospheric, gritty, lush with strings and moody textures. Songs like Eyelids and Dead Sea explored loneliness, abandonment, and the slow path toward healing. It wasn't bubblegum pop. It wasn't trying to fit in. It was exactly what she needed it to be, truth in melody. Paris later said that every note, every lyric, was born from the same place her father's music came from: emotion. Deep, lived emotion. She credited him not just as her inspiration, but as her blueprint. He always said, "Do it, and do it well." And I think about that every time I step into a booth. And while the comparisons to her father are inevitable, she's not trying to compete. She's carving something different, more intimate, less polished, more vulnerable. She's not dancing in stadiums. She's bleeding into microphones. Her voice isn't just inherited, it's earned. And with each track she releases, Paris Jackson steps further out of her father's shadow, not to escape it, but to stand beside it. To say, "This is who I am. And this is how I survived." For years, Paris Jackson existed in a strange paradox, hyper-visible to the world, but utterly misunderstood. People saw her face. They knew her name. But they didn't see her, not really. Now that's changed. She no longer hides behind her father's image or anyone else's expectations. Through her music, her advocacy, and her quiet rebellion, Paris has reclaimed her story, one chapter at a time. She still visits Neverland. The place that once felt like a magical fortress now carries a solemn beauty. The animals are gone. The rides are still. But the memories remain. She once described walking those grounds as painful but healing. A place where she can speak to her father in the silence. A place where the man behind the mask is still alive in spirit. Paris isn't trying to fix Michael Jackson's legacy. She's not here to clean up his controversies or relive his fame. She's here to carry forward what mattered most: his love, his values, his insistence on kindness, humility, and using your gifts to uplift others. She's still that little girl in the front row holding her dad's hand. But now she's also the woman who knows what it means to lose everything and still keep going. She once feared being known as just Michael Jackson's daughter. Now, she understands that being his daughter is a part of her identity, not the whole of it. And through every choice she makes, she's proving that legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. She bears her father's influence not through imitation, but through intention. Through every note she sings, every cause she supports, and every time she speaks with painful honesty about trauma and recovery, she honors the man who taught her to care more about soul than spectacle. Paris Jackson is no longer just surviving. She's creating, leading, becoming. And in doing so, she's writing a new chapter, not just for herself, but for the millions who felt lost in the shadows of someone else's spotlight. We once saw Paris Jackson as the quiet child behind a mask. Now we see a woman who found her voice and is using it to turn pain into purpose. What do you think about her transformation? Does her story change the way we understand Michael Jackson and what it means to grow up in his orbit? Let us know in the comments. And if you're moved by stories of survival, truth, and reinvention, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because some stories deserve to be heard. And this one is just beginning.